This episode is made possible by purchasing resources through the Creation Science for Kids store.
Welcome to the Creation Science
for Kids
show. Got some modeling clay? Now would be a good time to get it out and picture what it looked like early on day 6 of Creation Week. It's time to explore what God was doing as we zoom in our focus on our first dad. We'll get to hear from a guy years ago who had studied science and didn't know what to think, and he was able to literally dig down in the dirt and find out the truth of whom he should believe. Then we have something extra special to share with you, a new set of stories about kids learning about creation and evolution. Praise the Lord. I will give thanks to the Lord with my whole heart, in the company of the upright, in the congregation. Great are the works of the Lord, studied by all who delight in them. Full of splendor and majesty is his work, and his righteousness endures forever. He has caused his wondrous works to be remembered. The Lord is gracious and merciful. Psalm 111, 1-4. This is episode 39 of the podcast, where we learn about Jesus, our Creator, and his amazing world. Hi, I'm Sherry Fields, your host, and I'm joined today by my co-hosts, Charity.
Hi.
And Timothy.
Hi.
To follow along with what we're looking at, check out the show notes, creationscience4kids.com/dust. All right, I was trying to figure out how to divide up Genesis 2 because it's some of my favorite. And what I decided is to just take one verse and take our time with it. So we're going to read Genesis 2:7. Timothy, would you read it for us, please?
And the Lord God formed man of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul.
Okay, this is one of my favorite verses. Have you ever used Play-Doh or clay and formed a little person?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I made snakes instead.
Yeah, snakes are the easiest thing to make. Yeah, here, I've always liked to picture that it was something like that when God made man. Now, we've studied some anatomy, and the more you learn about what we're made out of with our heart and our organs and all the processes in our body, the things that have to be in place, he had a lot more to do than just have an arm here and a leg here and a blob for a head. There's so many cool things here. And especially when we look at it from science, what God is doing is incredible to think about. So first, what is it that God made man out of?
Dust.
Dust. Okay. And this isn't talking about the kind of dust that settles on the piano when you haven't been playing it for a while. This is what kind of dust?
Dirt.
Dirt. Yeah. So dust is its dry form, but we know there was already a mist coming up. So if you add water to dusty dirt outside, what does it turn into?
Mud.
Mud and clay, all that stuff. So he basically made Adam, the first man, out of the dirt. So I looked up, if you took your body and you broke it down into all the basic elements, and I found one guy, he actually even split up the water so that instead of
H2O.
Yeah, because we're over half
hydrogen and an oxygen.
Right. We're over half water. So if you take that apart, you've got a lot of hydrogen and a lot of oxygen. And he calculated that when you add in all the tiny bits of elements that we have, some of them are rare, that our bodies are worth about $160. A fair amount is because of the potassium we get from bananas, that it's worth so much, and we have enough that you can measure it, that it's worth like $7. So did God make us out of fancy stuff like gold and platinum and uranium?
No. Why
No.
would he make us out of uranium?
Uranium is what they use for atomic bombs.
Oh, then.
We could explode.
Right. So God just used everyday stuff. Now, the people who don't want to admit that God is the creator, they talk about us being made out of stardust because they believe that when the Big Bang happened, that the only thing around was hydrogen and a few other of the very light elements. And then it took stars to form everything heavier. And then they had to explode in supernovas. And then eventually that coalesced into Earth after billions of years. And so therefore, we, of course, are made out of those elements. So we're made out of stardust. But yeah,
It sound important.
it does sound important and very romantic. But is the truth about what God made us out of any less romantic?
No.
Yeah, because God made the earth there at the beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he used that stuff to make us. What does that tell you about our bodies? That it's made out of the same stuff as the whole planet. What did God make the other animals out of? How did he do it?
By speaking.
Yeah, and what did he say?
Let there be.
Well, let's look. Genesis 1, and we'll start with verse 11. And God said, let
the earth bring forth.
Okay, so how did he get the plants to come? He said, let
The earth bring forth.
the earth. Okay, now let's look at verse 20. And God said,
And God said, let the waters bring forth.
so he made the things that live in the water out of
Let the water bring forth.
the water bring forth. Okay, and then on day 6, in verse 24, and God said,
Let the earth bring forth.
so he made the living creatures out of
The earth.
the earth. And what are we made out of?
The earth.
Okay, when we look at everything alive, we do see a lot of similarities. There's a lot of DNA. I met a scientist. Well, I didn't really meet him. I listened to his presentation. When he was a marine biologist, he got to work with this kind of bit of DNA that makes sea creatures glow with a fluorescent kind of light that makes them really bright and colorful. And he was able to figure out a way to get the DNA out of, I think it was jellyfish, I'm not sure, and into little fish like you see at the aquarium. We've seen them at the store, haven't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some of them glow kind of orange, some green. And he was able to take it out of one creature that doesn't even have a brain and put it inside a fish, a bony fish, and it worked. There are a lot of similarities between our bodies and a monkey's. There are a lot of similarities among all living creatures. For one thing, we're all made out of the same ingredients. Is this something that would surprise you if you had read your Bible hundreds and hundreds of years ago? Would you be surprised to find out that we all have very similar things and we're made out of similar stuff?
No.
No, because God told us he made people out of the same stuff, the earth, that he used to make the animals and the plants. But did God use an animal to make the first man?
No.
What did he use?
The earth.
He went straight back to the basic ingredients. So he molded him and shaped him out of dirt. He did not take an animal. He did not take an ape-like creature. He started fresh. So we see both the similarities and we see the differences. And when the other creatures came alive, did God do anything special?
No.
No. I think on day 6, I believe I mentioned how C.S. Lewis described it in The Magician's Nephew, where they watched as this mound of earth kind of started growing up like a bubble getting ready to pop, and then out popped an animal. That's how he pictured it. It sounds pretty reasonable to me, but that's not at all what we see here when he's describing man. He forms his body laying there on the dirt, and then how did he come alive?
He breathed the breath of life into his nostrils.
Yeah, what are nostrils?
The things you smell with.
Right. And where are they? They're part of your
Nose.
nose. They're the 2 holes that you breathe through your nose. Yeah. And he breathed into his nose what?
The breath of life.
Yeah. So this is God himself moving the air. And how that works, because God is spirit, but still he makes a very important point. Both God can move air, but also he was giving somehow his own life, passing it on to us. That's such a beautiful picture, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it's part of it. When we look back at Genesis 1, we saw that we were created in God's image. This gives us that we have his life in us. When we read about Moses and the tabernacle, the very first, when they were ready to start sacrificing, God sent fire down from heaven to light the altar. And then they were to keep that fire burning constantly. So that fire that had been started by God was to keep burning forever. Later we see, again, when Solomon dedicated the temple, the same thing happened. He sent fire down on the altar, and they were to keep it burning. Those fires got lost. But the breath that God breathed into us is passed from parents to their children, all the way down to us. We have that same, the reason we are alive, every time we breathe, we can remember that God started our life and we belong to him, but he's also watching over us. He's watched over his breath of life to continue from that day to this. There are so many cool things in that verse, aren't there?
Yes.
Yes.
And man became a living soul. Now, one of the things I looked up the word living soul, and it's the same one used even for fish. So from the words themselves, we don't get that man has anything extra, but we know from the rest of it, what he's doing, that we are separate from the animal kingdom. We talk about man's spirit, and that there's a part of us that certainly continues to live even when our bodies die. But we have a physical body. We breathe and eat and go to the bathroom and all that stuff just like animals do. But we're alive. So this is a really special verse and one of the most fun things to do because we can picture what God is doing. Some kids, when they're studying anatomy, they'll actually take their clay and form a heart and have the different ventricles and the aorta in blue and all kinds of stuff. We can just do a tiny fraction of the kind of detail that God put into what he formed with his clay. But it gives us an idea, a sense that God likes making too.
He likes playing with Play-Doh.
Yeah, sort of. Oh, that reminds me. There was one other idea. Throughout the Old Testament, you'll see, and even in the New, you'll see God talking about potters and clay and how God could take like even the whole people of Israel and when they messed up royally, that it's like a potter who has a lump of clay. He's shaping a pot, realizes, that got messed up. So he smushes it down and he starts over again and compares us, whether individually or our society, to clay. And that goes back to Adam, the comparison between us being worked and shaped and turned into something beautiful and useful. One of my favorite verses is where it talks about those who keep themselves pure will be used as a vessel unto honor in God's kingdom. That's one of my favorite things because that means if we live a life according to God's rules, he promises, even in the New Testament, to use us for honor and glory. But that's going back to the same thing. It's the same clay used for all different kinds of purposes. All right. Now, I want to take a couple minutes and we're going to listen to an interview of a guy I met at the Creation Research Society conference. It was a question and answer time at the end of one of the sessions, and this guy just shared his own story of how he realized that the flood really worked and that God could have created the way he said he did rather than evolution in billions of years. And I thought it was so great. I said, "Hey, can I interview?" And he said, "Sure." So let's listen.
My name is Tim Stout. I am a pastor. I also have done a lot of work in creation science. I have a pamphlet that I've passed out almost 100,000 copies of across the country. Very definitely involved in creation science and have written almost 50 articles in the Creation Research Society's Creation Matters. A number of years ago, this was actually around 1969, I had just graduated from college with a degree in physics from UCLA and was driving along this road which separates Ventura, California from Oxnard, California, and they'd had a flood up in the mountains there with about 8 inches of rain that dropped overnight, and it was a huge flood across the Santa Clara River, which is normally like a quarter of a mile wide, and it was up 33 to 30 so feet higher than its normal bottom, and this road that I'd driven on was covered by the river. I heard on the radio, people I worked with had driven on it to come into work, that it was closed because of the flood. And then it was opened up. No, it wasn't open, I'm sorry. But the waters had receded. They just thought the waters had receded by the time I got off work. We figure it was actually about a 4-hour period that the water was on the road. So I went to look and see. I just read in Henry Morris's book, The Genesis Flood, that when moving water lays down layers, well, it's going to be in separate layers. And I thought it would have been dumped. So a big question to me is, are these going to be individual layers? It was laid down within a 4-inch period of time, or is it going to be a big mess? The water reached to the bottom of a stop sign. I figured it was maybe 4 feet tall, something like that, from to the ground. And I got in, and I started digging out the mud, and I found out it was layered sand and debris, like crushed leaves. Right. Sand, crushed leaves. And there are about 10 layers per inch, as far down as I could dig, a very even thing. So that means there are roughly 4 feet, call it 50 inches, 10 layers per inch. There's about 500 layers that were laid down. They were laid down in about 4 hours. Now, I had just a few years before that taken a geology class in school that said it was 1 year per layer.
Right.
That should have been 500 years for that to have been deposited. Instead of 500 years, it was like 4 hours.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And when you go through the numbers, I don't know, it seems like it was like 500,000 or 1 million times faster than what geologists said it would have been.
Faster.
And that had a real impact on me, because I just read a creation science book that said I should expect this. And I knew in geology, in my classes, I should expect something totally different, and the data supported the young Earth viewpoint.
Praise the Lord. That was awesome. Let's see, for me, I wanted to know, what's your favorite Bible verse and why? Or a Bible verse related to creation?
Well, the one Bible verse related to creation is Romans 1:20. As I said, I've written almost 50 articles in Creation Matters, and that is the theme. I'd have something without excuse,
Absolutely.
The testimony of, and then show how different things God has done that provide a testimony of His person in creation. So it would be Romans 1:20.
Perfect. And what would you tell a young kid thinking about what kinds of things they could do in life? Because they could be anything. What would you tell them about science?
Well, I'll say that theology is really the prince of all fields. That studies
Absolutely.
the Creator.
Yes.
Science is one aspect, which is very useful. But the prince of all fields is the study of God Himself.
That's why I always open with the Bible, and then I add in other science. Thank you so much.
That was cool.
Yeah. As you could hear, my baby was with me. My husband wasn't able to come along, so that's why I didn't get as many recordings as I wanted to, but I got a couple. So what did he learn? What had he learned in school, in his geology university, that he should expect from a water laid down quickly?
A layer per year.
Yeah. If it was laid down quickly, that it should be all one mass. It should have been one thick layer. So when he actually dug into the mud to see what had been laid down, was it all one mass?
No.
What was it?
Different layers.
Right. How many?
500.
Yeah, 500 from the bottom of a stop sign down to the road is what he calculated based on what he dug. God had blessed him that he had been able to recently have read a book. So he was able to say, okay, I've heard 2 different views. Let's see which one matches reality. And because he already loved God, he said he was an old earth creationist at that point. He was willing to let the evidence speak for itself. And if God said he had a flood, he was willing to see that if that was the truth. Oh, yes. So let's look at his favorite verse. He didn't actually quote it, so I'll read it for you. Romans 1:20. For the invisible things of him, that's God, from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. There are some things about God that are obvious to everyone on the planet. That God has power, that he lasts forever, and that he is God. He is something different from us. He has a power that nothing in the natural world can have. All right, and what did he say he thought young people should study?
Theology.
Which is, what's theo mean?
I'm going to Leo. I don't
No.
I know that's not right.
God. And ology is?
Study of.
Study. So the study of God. For Christian theology, it means studying the Bible and what it tells us about God. Yeah, that was really cool. And I will link to Pastor Stout's website in the show notes. All right, now it's time for a very special report. What do you have for us today, Charity?
A book report on challenging Miss Evolution from the Creation Science Club.
That sounds amazing. Okay, so a couple months back, I get emails from the Creation Ministries International, and I saw one of their new resources was a set of books for children. It's like, oh, this is awesome. So I contacted them, told them I would let you guys know what we thought, and they sent me some copies. There are actually 5 books in the series. Charity and I have read through the first one so far, so we're going to let you know what we think about it. What age kids is this written for? You don't know? Well, how old is the main character?
13.
So the main character is 13, but what do you say? What kind of kids is it likely?
Homeschoolers, age 7 to 15.
15. Yeah. Well, they'd have to be pretty good readers if they were 7. But what if they went to public school? About what age group are they focusing?
9 to around 13.
Yeah. Yeah, usually you have the main character a little older than you want the kids to read because you'd rather read about somebody older than you than younger. Okay, and what's the basic story about?
A boy named David who's scared of his 8th grade honors science class because what he's learning about is challenging his Christian beliefs about origins.
Mm-hmm. And then what happens? Who rescues him? Who does he run into right at the beginning?
A bear, and he runs into some teenagers and a creation scientist who offered to help him. The book is broken into 4 divisions, and at the end of each, David writes a report about what he's learned.
So what did you think about the story? Do you think it was well written? Was it interesting? Because you read a lot, so you've got a high taste, and you're also a girl, so you're not quite their ideal audience. What did you like about the story?
Everything.
All right, like what? For example, did you like the characters? What about David? Did you care about him?
Yes and no.
Yeah, they didn't flesh out David very well, who were very interesting characters in the book.
Miss Evolution.
Yeah, actually, they did a really good job. Okay, so Ms. M.S. Evolution is like, seriously? Is that what you're going to call it? Because that's the title of the book, Challenging Ms. Evolution. Is like, that's just silly. But if you look, they had some other names like that in the book. Who else did they introduce us to?
Jack and Jill Hill.
Right. Yeah, it's like, really? Jack and Jill with the last name Hill. And then there was also the librarian. What was her name?
Misinformed.
Yes. She just couldn't see how she could be misinformed as misinformed. So I found it kind of odd that they had these very silly made-up names, and they kind of had the characters know that it was silly made-up names, but it didn't really stop you from recognizing when the book got serious. I just thought they probably shouldn't have. But they also had the twins. Tell us about the twins.
I'm trying to remember the disease they have.
Oh, Asperger's. It was something in the dedication. It said that they were dedicating it to everybody with in the autism spectrum, especially with Asperger's. And I thought they did a really good job of making them very likable and believable characters. What was different about them versus ordinary people?
They were super smart.
Yeah, so they loved
science.
Right. But what weren't they as good at because of their Asperger's?
Talking with people.
Right, why not? Because they could talk your ear off.
Yeah.
But
they can't read body language as well.
Right, so they would look kind of awkward and have a more difficult time socially figuring out what's going on and keep all those little subtle things that you learn. They would never be popular in school because they just, but did they care?
No.
No. And in the story, they had been kind of taken under the wing of this guy who was a creation scientist. And so they could be good at what they were good at and not worry about other people who said, well, you're just weird. Okay. So I thought they did a really good job on that. What else was fun about the story?
How the creation scientist had a plane. And they could get from, like, the Grand Canyon to Mount St. Helens and climb up both of them in a day.
Yes. Yeah, I did find that a little hard to believe. It was fun, but they went to those 2 places. They also went to Yellowstone and to the Galapagos Islands. It was like, whoever this creation scientist is, he's rolling in the dough because that's expensive travel. But that allowed them to go to some of the best places in the world that both evolutionists and creationists point to as evidence for their side, and then examine what you really see. So that was both good and kind of made me raise my eyebrows. Anything else?
Not really.
Okay. So I found, for the most part, the plot was pretty well done, way better than I could do a story. There are a couple of things where I noticed when I was first researching this book that it was originally self-published. So you can tell, like, they have a flip phone, and the boys have this kind of science fiction reality goggles that allow them to watch videos together. It was definitely written before smartphones where we actually can watch videos together. So some of that stuff is like, it'd be fun to do a revision and correct some of those. And a few places is like, at the very end, it has a letter from David where he speaks a Spanish word to us. And there wasn't a Spanish word at all before. You kind of got the impression that they lived in the middle of the Smoky Mountains or something. But all in all, I found it really good, and I'm expecting the rest of the series as they mature in their characters that they'll probably will know why David is speaking to us in Spanish. I also found it believable when my daughter first said, hey, by the way, they have Ms. Lucian become a creationist at the end. It's like, seriously? That's a bit far-fetched. But the way they have it, where her mom had prayed for her as a girl, made it much more believable, because we see that all the time where people have a Christian godly influence, and especially where a mom has been praying for somebody and years later that God continues to work. I found it a very believable book, and I'm looking forward to reading the rest of the series. So don't forget, you can find links to all the things we've talked about today by visiting the show notes page, creationscience4kids.com/dust or /039 for episode 39.
While you're there, we'd like to ask for your help. If you know someone who might enjoy listening to this podcast and checking out our website, would you let them know for us? Every article we do, including today's show note, has share buttons on the side to make it super easy for you to pass on to your friends on Facebook or by email. You have amazing power to help your friends find out the truth with just a click of a button.
Plus, if you want to encourage us, leaving the show a rating on iTunes is a great way to do that and help families looking for new podcasts to find us. Thanks! And remember, you can find both the Creation Science Club books and many other in-depth materials to learn about God's creation by stopping at my store page. I list my personal favorites for kids, and clicking through from my page costs you nothing while helping to pay for this podcast.
Do you like science? Got a subject you want to learn about? Or maybe you like telling stories?
If you send me a report, story, joke, or interesting idea, I might use it in a future show. Head over to creationscience4kids.com/podcast to contact me.
Well, this finishes up our show for today. Until next time, have fun treasuring our amazing universe and creator.
Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power. For thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are and were created. Revelation 4:11.